Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, the podcast where conversations about wealth go deeper. This isn't about flashy success or one-size-fits-all advice. It's about real people designing financial lives that align with who they are, what they value, and the legacies they're building. We bring together voices from business, finance, law, and leadership to talk about the moments that shape them and the strategies that sustain them. Here is your host, Chris Everett.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, where money meets meaning and purpose. What if I told you that one of the world's most influential business thinkers started his career with a mathematics degree from the University of Bombay and spent nearly 4 decades helping a 100,000 person organization navigate the digital revolution, only to realize that the real revolution wasn't about technology at all? So today's guest has been named by Businessweek as one of the top business leaders for his pioneering innovation. Time magazine dubbed him one of 5 marketing innovators. He's been inducted into the Ad Age Interactive Hall of Fame, and he's one of only 300 people selected to the Advertising Hall of Fame in its 75-year history. But here's what makes his story so compelling. After decades at the cutting edge of digital transformation, helping build some of the world's first interactive agencies and advising companies like Google, Meta, IBM, Walmart, and JP Morgan Chase, he wrote a book that questions everything the tech world tells us about success. He argues that in our data-based age, we're losing something essential: our humanity, our creativity, our soul. His book, Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data, was called perhaps the best recent book on stakeholder capitalism by The Economist. Strategy magazine named it the Marketing Book of the Year, and it sparked a global conversation about what it means to lead with both spreadsheets and stories, with both data and dignity. His weekly thought letter is read by 30,000 leaders around the world. His new book, Rethinking Work, just launched in February 2025. He hosts 2 podcasts. He's co-founded the Athena Project, focused on modern leadership. And he runs the Tobaccowala Foundation, which helps over 10,000 people gain better access to health and education in India. But perhaps most remarkably, he delivers keynote speeches without slides, audio, or video. Just the wisdom of 4 decades distilled into pure storytelling. He's been rated the top speaker at 95% of events where feedback was collected. So today we're talking about staying human in the age of AI, balancing data with meaning, career transformation, and what it means to lead with soul in a world obsessed with metrics. Please welcome Rishad Tobaccowala, author, senior advisor to Publicis Group, and co-founder of the Athena Project. Rishad, welcome to Beyond the Numbers.
Well, Chris, thank you for that amazing introduction. I should now exit left because I can go nowhere but downhill from there.
I am so not worried. So look, I want to start with the title of your book, Restoring the Soul of Business. That's a bold statement. It suggests that somewhere along the way, business lost its soul, right? So when did you first realize that something fundamental was missing? Was there a specific moment or experience that made you think, we need to have this conversation?
Yes. So, first of all, thank you for having me as your guest. My first book, which is Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data, which continues to sell well, and people now read it as Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of AI, came out about 6 years ago. And I started thinking about writing the book 2 years prior to that. So that was 8 years ago. And I began to recognize that almost all companies had become deeply fixated and almost obsessed with data, math, and algorithms. And in doing so, I began to worry that A, they were forgetting that their organization was made up of non computing, non digitally based, feeling oriented things called human beings. Number two, that it was very hard unless you were really, really well capitalized and huge, like a Google or a Meta, to differentiate on data alone. It was essential. And third is that marketing and brand building, which is what my first career was about, really at the fundamental heart of it was about stories that move people. So I would often say to people that a brand is data with a soul, right? But if you only have data and no soul, you don't have a brand. If you only have math without the magic and the meaning, you don't have a company. And this is the reason I wrote my book. And the reason I could write this book with some credibility was because I have an advanced degree in mathematics. I was responsible with other people to build probably the most successful digital and database company.
So you're not taking your shoes off to count your toes to do the math. Okay.
Right. So the fact that I understood and I spoke about the power of data and math, but I then reminded people that it wasn't just a spreadsheet, as you say, but also the story. And that in combining those, and if you don't combine those, you tend to basically start saying things like culture matters, but by the way, I'm going to run the company through numbers. And I was hearing from a lot of people, and because of the fact that while I was senior, for a variety of reasons, I remained very accessible to everyone who was maybe both from different parts of organizations, not even my organization, or people who had just come in. And they would, over drinks or over breakfast or over just a conversation, say, we don't feel that our company, it didn't have to be just the company I worked for because I worked with a lot of different clients. We don't feel our company seems to get that we are the company too and not just some numbers. And that gave me to believe at that time that the way companies improve, the way companies transform, and the way companies grow is when people improve, transform, and grow.
Well, I think there's something very special you also didn't say, which is you made space for that conversation to happen in the first place.
Yes. And in fact, it's something that in my first book and now in my second book called Rethinking Work, I have actually a chapter called The Rise of Leaders and the Fall of Managers. And in a short form, I have basically said we have entered the age of debossification, but someone forgot to tell the bosses. So they're still very confused as to what happened.
It's interesting because so for example, in my firm, the thing that's like ringing for me is we have a culture of honor here. We've always had a culture of honor. And I have two people that work for me that were my clients before they started working for me. And these two guys get the culture. So it was real easy for them to continue to exude the culture. But there are days, Rishad, that we fight like cats and dogs. But we've given each other permission to speak honestly and to give feedback, the gift that keeps on giving, so that if one of us is missing something, just don't see it. We give each other permission to stop and listen. So it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
So I think that's why, bosses tend to go by the wayside if they don't listen very well.
And what I will tell you is that, these days, if you actually scratch a boss or douse the boss with a little bit of alcohol, you will find something very revealing about the individual. That A, they're a human being, that they tend to be often much nicer than the growly face that they put out into the world, and that all of them are asking a question that many of us are asking, that in these tectonic and transformative times, are they still relevant?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. You're speaking insecurity is what you're talking about. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's transition a little bit. You spent nearly 40 years at Publicis Group, right? Rising to becoming the global chief strategist, chief growth officer, of a 100,000 person organization. So you were literally at the epicenter of the digital revolution. You helped create one of the first interactive agencies, what, 25 years ago? So,
30 years ago. It was
oh, 30
actually,
years ago.
yes, 30 years from today. It was in 1996 that we created the first of these agencies. Yeah.
But now you operate as what you call a company of one, an independent advisor working with Fortune 500 and FTSE 100 executives, sitting on boards, co founding the Athena Project. Tell us about that transition. So, how did you go from leading massive organizations to becoming an independent voice? And what does that freedom allow you to do differently?
So the reason that I made that transition is I had the opportunity and the freedom to make that decision. And I'll tell you later on why I wrote my second book, because when I began to realize that things were happening in the world of work that would potentially not give people the same freedom and luck that I had to make such a decision. So I had been working for about 33 years at that time. I was senior, and I had grown up in the Leo Burnett Company, which is a Chicago based agency. And in Leo Burnett, they basically, regardless of what your title was, if you were anywhere in management, you were asked to leave when you turned 58. Okay.
Wow.
It was basically that at 58, they would say, beautiful, now go live the rest of your life. Thank you very much. Okay. And so everybody planned for 58.
So this is part of the reason why marketing always, kowtows to the younger age. Is
Yes.
that what I'm
Yes.
really hearing? Yeah.
There was two reasons that they were doing that. It was less younger age at that time, because there were a lot of other issues at that time. If you were in the 1980s, it was primarily male, all kinds of other things, right? It was just young age. But it was because it was a privately held partnership, and they needed people to leave so they could promote other people into the partnership so they could keep their talent. And because there was only X number of shares, you basically sold back your shares. They bought it back. You got a handful of money. They gave you a kiss and said, come back for our annual party. You have money to go to wherever you want to go. We like you. You like us. Bye bye. And it wasn't like a shock. It wasn't somebody came up to you and said, you need to know. They basically said, hey, when you were 35, 40, if you're going to be here 58,
It was
plan
the
your life.
culture.
That
Okay.
this is the way the world works. Before I got a 58, the Publicis Group bought Leo Burnett, which is the French company. I grew through there, and my CEO was in his 70s, so they didn't have any of those rules. But in my mind, I had planned my life for 58. And my boss, in addition to the CEO, the global CEO, I first worked for somebody who worked for the global CEO before I worked for the global CEO. And that gentleman, who was on the board and very senior, was also an old Leo Burnett person. And he says, I am going to leave at 58. And he did, right? When he did that, I was 53. So I said, I got 5 more years, I got to go. And so I actually built things saying, at 58, I'm going to have to do something else. What am I going to do? Now, I happened to be in a position where no one was telling me, but I said I would be financially in a position where I could do whatever I wanted to do, after having worked for 35, 36 years. And knowing that that's, the date when the music stops.
Well,
Okay.
not only that, you spent years with that runway, right? So
I knew, like, it wasn't like somebody told me you have to leave in 4 or 5 years. It was like,
yeah.
you knew 15, 20 years ago. So you planned that that's the thing. So I said, hey, I actually can do it, but nobody's asking me to do it, but I would like to do it. And that's when I basically asked myself 3 questions, which I ask everyone who may have the freedom, but even for those who don't have the freedom, which we'll talk about later. Because remember, I had the financial freedom, which most people don't have, right? You help people obviously get there and beyond. But one of the things that I asked was, when is an elegant time to leave? So someone had told me while I was thinking about this, Rishad, every career has a midnight hour, and the smart people leave at 5 to 12, right? And this gentleman basically said, when they think you're a prince or princess, that's great. But the moment it strikes midnight, you turn into a pumpkin, they won't like you. And he says, look around you, because now there is no age where people have to leave. They stay past their sell by date,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah. We can
it's a
talk of a lot
combination,
of examples in other industries that do that as
a lot,
well,
right?
to
And
their
it's a
detriment.
combination of power, a feeling that they're irreplaceable. They don't know what to do if they don't do that.
Just lying
I
to
said,
themselves. Yeah.
right. So my stuff is okay. Elegant is probably when my CEO turns it over to another CEO would be an elegant time, right? Which is how, so that was one. The other is a thing called wisdom, which is all you have to do is look at the actuarial tables and say, sometime around 80, you're going to be dead if you follow the actuarial tables. I'm not necessarily saying the actual tables are true, but that's the way insurance companies work. So they say, look, 81, 82, you're done. If you're a woman, you're slightly older. And then I noticed that around 75, most people lose a step. Now, some people go to 99 without losing a
I don't
step.
know, kiddo. Listen, Warren Buffett,
It went to 99, right?
95, well, 95, he just retired.
He
So
just right. But it basically happens is like, and I was reporting to a person who had his everything around him at 77. So, but I said, at let's say I've got up to 75 for a healthy life. So, what I want to do I want to do this for the rest of my life when I run out of time? So that's wisdom. So elegance is what's a good time to leave. Wisdom is time's going to run out. And then smarts, well, there are some things that you can do but you can't do when you work for a company. And so I thought about it and I basically said, I love what I do. I do it really well. But there are three things about this job that I do not like. I said, I love my job 70%. They pay me well. And if you love a job 70% of the time and they pay you well, you've got a fantastic job. And the 30% that you dislike has got nothing to do about integrity or bitterness or being treated badly. None of that, right? But it's like, and so I discovered that the 30% I did not like was because I did not control my time, right? And I said, as I get older, time becomes more valuable, but I don't control it. Why? What are the three reasons I couldn't control my time? Very simple. I had a board of directors, even though I was on it. I had bosses and board of directors. Second, I was in the service business, so I had clients.
who were your bosses?
Right. Third, if you're senior, the only reason you got so senior is because you're surrounded by world-class talent who, in addition to being world-class talent, often behave like orchids. They need love and care and attention, which you have to
And
jump
extra
and give them.
vitamins. Oh, yeah.
Right. So I said, I'm yanked around by the talent, by the clients, and the bosses. So I got to get rid of all those three. And that's how I became a company of one. So now I don't like my boss, but that's me. I don't like my talent, that's me. And I set it up in such a way that I have no real clients. I work with people as I talk or do a little bit of advice, but they're not like clients. And they're so distributed that no one can basically say you have to do something, because my whole thing would be, no, I don't have to do anything. Okay, which makes sense. And what that did, in a really weird thing, that while I was very trusted and liked when I was a publicist and I had 100,000 people working with me, oddly, I became more in demand and more trusted as a company of one, which I did not expect. And the reason was two things. One is I had nothing to sell now. So people basically let me speak honestly. And I said, look, I could speak a little bit more honestly because I don't have 100,000 jobs to protect, right? So my whole stuff is, it doesn't matter if I get kicked out, but my God, I got a team I got to make sure it looks after, and they depend on me for their employment. So that was one. But there was another one, which is what I remind people, that unlike a lot of people, I did not connect my capabilities to my company only. So people weren't calling me because I controlled a budget or controlled troops. People were also calling me because I knew think myself, right?
You're describing freedom.
freedom. And so what basically happens is when people call you for you and not because of the money you control or the troops you control, right? That means you have some skill that is marketable or monetizable. And so I often tell people that in today's world, even if you're at a very large company, I have so many of my colleagues, you know, they suddenly find that everyone's calling them, and then when they don't have this position, nobody calls them. So they call me and they say, like, how come they call you and they don't call? I said, two reasons. One is I told you build a skill. But I said the second is when you had that power and when you had all that money, you didn't treat people really well because you actually like kicked them around because you had that power. I said I didn't do that. I was like being very nice because I said one day I'm going to be out on the streets, so I better be nice to everybody. I mean, not just nice to be nice, but like respectful and answer calls, etc., take meetings. And that is a big thing. That so I've become this company of one primarily because it gives me a great degree of freedom. It gives me a great degree of optionality. It allows me to learn a lot if you sort of think about it. And in today's world, it allows me to move really fast, cost effectively compared to a lot of other people, right? Which is, if you notice when you call me, I was the person responding. I was the person, for the calls. I didn't have an agent, an executive assistant, anybody. Now, I'm not saying those people aren't good. I had all of those, right? But what happens is my whole thing is dealing with me. And what that does is it gives you a great degree of freedom.
Rashad, you remind me. So I started this podcast in October, and I have spoken to so many people, so many very different people, and I am learning so much. So when I listen to you talk about the freedom that you have and the different people you can talk to, it just really fills you up, doesn't it? Yeah, it expands the power of what you can even think about. So it's a lot of fun. Let's do this. Let's go back to your book for a second. You talk about digitalog companies, organizations that expertly integrate digital tools with analog people. So it's a powerful concept. Paint us a picture. So what does digitalog company actually look like in practice? And more importantly, what are the warning signs that a company maybe has become too data blind?
Yeah, so very much like my belief that the future is about story and spreadsheet and math and meaning. A digital company basically utilizes the latest of digital and today AI and other technology, but
Okay.
they do it in a way that expands, extends, and celebrates the humans that work in the company. Okay.
Give me an example.
So I'll give you a very simple example of two companies in which remain somewhat true today, and then two companies which were one was more digitalog and one was less digitalog, and how one of them actually figured out what to do. So I'll give you sort of an example. And everybody knows these names, but you'll be surprised when you see how they did. So let's look at airlines. Airlines fly the very same planes to the very same airports under the same FAA rules. So if you look at a commodity product, it's an airline. If you think about it, right? If the jets are from Boeing, the planes are whatever, they have to follow FAA rules, the fuel is the same. Why is it that one airline consistently is the most profitable airline with the highest employee scores and customer scores, and another airline keeps getting into trouble? And the two airlines are Delta and American. Okay. So Delta keeps soaring to new heights, and American keeps like bopping around. Okay. And the reason is American for a long time was run by a bunch of engineers who optimized for the plane. And Delta obviously has to optimize for the plane, otherwise the plane will crash. You have a problem. It doesn't matter how good the service is if everybody's dead. Okay. But they invested a lot of money in people, in training people, in sharing about 25 to 30% of the profits with the employees, of having bonus days on Valentine's Day. That's when they would give people sort of bonuses. So you step into a Delta flight cabin, even an economy and an American cabin, and it's a night and day difference. And basically, it's a culture of people, and they build amazing sort of technology around it. But that's sort of one example in that area. I'll give you another example of which are two very well regarded companies. At that time and now, they're also continue to be well regarded. But I'll actually name three companies and how they've changed in position. So one is Costco, one is Walmart, and one is Amazon. Okay. And I would say in the general world, with the exception of maybe Hermes, these three are seen as the prime retailers today in the world, right?
I've never heard of Hermes. What is that?
So Hermes is the luxury brand that makes, scarves and Birkin bags and things
Oh,
like that.
okay.
So the most valuable brands in the world tend to be Hermes, Costco, Walmart, and Amazon in retail.
Got it. Okay.
So, but Hermes is luxury. It's completely different. These are for everybody, more or less. Okay. For a long time, Amazon was doing very well as a digitally driven company, and Costco was doing very well as a human based company. You became a member of Costco, people would go there for an experience of shopping. You went to buy one thing and you came out with 5,000 things, right? And Walmart was actually not doing very well till the new CEO, who just exited after 10 years, Doug McMillon, came on. And he was caught between a rock and a hard place. Walmart was not as friendly and did not have good customer relationships and did not have good employee relationships as Costco, and did not have any of the technology of Amazon, right? It was stuck in the middle. So you had a deeply digital company called Amazon. You had a deeply analog company called Costco, but Costco also used technology. Amazon used technology to make you feel close. These guys said, okay, we got to do something different. And over the next 5-6 years, they decided to integrate and become a combination of Amazon and Costco. So
It's so clear. Yeah.
yesterday, Walmart basically became a $1 trillion company. And what they did is they basically put more money into talent, raise people's salaries. Today, someone who runs a Walmart store can make over $250,000. If you think about it, Walmart.com is a real competitor to Amazon.com. Sam's Club isn't yet Costco, but is getting there. But the emphasis was Doug McMillon basically said, I need to invest in people and technology. So he also created an Apple-like campus in Bentonville, Arkansas, which I've been to. So you feel like you're in California in the middle of Bentonville, like it's a campus.
Yeah.
But he integrated people, and over 10 years, he changed the whole company. And I use examples like Delta, or I use examples like Walmart. A lot of senior people pay attention because I'm not talking about companies that just make you feel good. These are companies that perform fantastically on the metrics that leaders sometimes care about, which is, market value, stock price, return on invested capital, all of those things.
Sure. I mean, all these things are important, but let's say you find somebody that is overly data driven. How do you help them get to that place of balance?
There are two ways I help them to get to a sense of balance. If it's an individual and they say they're very data driven, give them the following two statements. And almost everybody I've given the following two statements to. I give them three statements. So, statement one is I show them the most successful companies in the world are actually digital companies. They're data driven and analog. So, I said, let me show you in every category with the math. So, first is I use the math because they're data driven. I use data to show them that data driven only companies don't do as well as these other companies. So, my thing is that if data is your currency, I will come with data to show you you're wrong. So, that's number one. But that gets them intellectually there, But I've never found people to change if I just get them intellectually. I have to get them emotionally there too.
Well, that makes sense, of course. Yeah. I think all of humanity is like that.
And to get them emotionally there, I basically say the following two things. One is through love and one is through fear. So I combine love and fear. So the carrot and the stick. Okay. So on the love part of it, I basically ask them, since they're so data driven, could they please show me their wrist? So they said, what do you want to see my wrist? I just said, show me your wrist, your left wrist or your right wrist. Show me your wrists. So they think it's really strange. So they show me their wrist. Usually, in almost every case, on their left wrist, usually it's the left wrist, but sometimes on the right wrist, is a thing that they are wearing called a watch. Okay. And I say, may I take a look at the watch brand? And many of these very senior people, some may be wearing an Apple Watch, but most people tend to wear expensive watches. Okay, these are senior people I'm talking about. So, they may have whatever, a Tag Heuer or a Rolex, something like that. Okay, a good watch. So I said, good, you're wearing that thing. So I said, ask me another question. Would you be willing to share what car you drive? Okay. So they said, so they tell me what the car they drive. And usually the car is some sort of luxury brand. Okay, American, Japanese, German, some luxury brand. So I said, okay, your phone has a better watch than your watch. Your watch is a complete waste of time. I literally said it's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. You have to look at the wrist. You're spending a whole bunch of money. Any car if you live in the city, you probably don't even need a car, but let's say you're out not in the city. Any car that is more expensive than a Toyota Camry is you're wasting money.
Right. So now that you've offended them,
yeah. So in fact, what I basically said is, you have just proved to me that people choose with their hearts and they use numbers to decide what they just did. Right? You are basically making 7 out of your 10 purchases have nothing to do with data driven. And by the way, do you have children? And they say, yes. I said, what's the ROI on children? Any good recently? Okay. They said, no. So I said, every human decision, every big brand decision is made on heart. And you're telling me it's all about data and you aren't doing it yourself. So that's the second point. Okay. So that says, oh, I got it. And then the third one, which is the fear one. So I haven't insulted them, but I've said, look, you choose on love and desire and provenance and storytelling and identity, and you say nobody else does. Everybody does, even though you're a data-driven person. And the third thing is, I say, hey, look, I'm a person with advanced mathematics, and I believe as I see where technology is coming, if your job is primarily data-driven, you will be replaced by a machine very fast, which is what's now happening, right? And I said, the reality of it is, and you, as you know only too well, since you are very good at this. So I said, even the best financial planners really are emotional psychotherapists.
oh
right?
my goodness,
They are not really.
Would that I would have invested in tissue a million years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I said, money is both very left brain and math driven, but it's a very right brain. It's everything about freedom and independence and fear and history. And I said, and then they say, okay, we get it. Okay. So it's basically, I first show them the data, then I basically go and some combination. Obviously, I customize it to the individual. And obviously, I say it in a nice, respectful manner. So I don't
You
get
probably
kicked out of the
smile a
office.
lot when you're telling them this.
Yeah, I smile. Right. And then they realize what is basically sort of happening. And then we sort of move on. But the truth of the matter is, we are already seeing it. I mean, these days where we see significant, as AI is coming in and transforming businesses, companies that were just built on code are getting hurt really badly,
Yeah,
as they
because
did
it's
yesterday
so
and
easy
today.
to replace.
It's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
easy to replace. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so you've got this weekly thought letter. Fascinating title. The future does not fit in the
In the
containers of
containers
the
of the
past.
past. Yep.
So, what does that mean to you, and why is that message so critical for leaders today? Especially, I guess, is a great follow up question in light of the AI automation, rapid technological change, right?
So there are 4 quick things I'll tell you, which may make your audience think that I've had lots to drink in the morning. We're recording this just after lunch, so I have not yet. But so the first is this: Every organization tends to be designed around yesterday. Okay. The reason an organization is successful is it solved either yesterday or today's problem. It did not solve tomorrow's problem. And an example I give you is this: every automobile company was optimized for yesterday. They benchmarked against every other automobile company. So Mercedes said, my competitor is BMW, Audi, Cadillac, whatever it is. Okay.
Well, I suppose except for Tesla.
But guess what happened? But none of them talked about two other companies, three other companies. They paid no attention to three companies. So these are all the companies, right, who are the winners. So they're optimized for today: Tesla, Uber, and the Chinese. Okay. So now here's what we have: the two most valuable automobile companies in the world are Tesla. In fact, the three most valuable companies in the world are Tesla, Uber, and BYD from China. Okay. None of which anybody was looking at. And what did those three people ask? They didn't ask the questions of today. The questions of today and the way these organizations were designed, when they were designed around internal combustion engine, hardware, and selling cars. These people were built around electric, software, and access to mobility. Okay. So, give you an idea of how this is. So, I grew up for a variety of reasons. I got to go to Germany. So, I loved German cars. And in India, like, the big car there was a Mercedes. Okay. And there was like a thing. And the top line Mercedes, besides like over the top Mercedes, is the S Class. So, the S Class Mercedes. The S Class Mercedes 4 years ago sold approximately 100,000 Mercedeses. Today it's 50,000. Why? Because all their Chinese sales have almost halved. They're still very successful in China because, in effect, if you look at the Chinese luxury cars, they leave Mercedes to shame, right? Yeah, because what they've done is they've designed an electric platform from ground up, while Mercedes is still trying to do Mercedes. So when Mercedes tried with EQS to put EQS into Mercedes, it didn't do too well. When Porsche tried to put electric into 911, it didn't work well. Those are the containers of the past, right? And that's what I mean. And you see that across the board. And organizational design is also built around the containers of the past. So because of that, the four crazy things I tell people is, here are some of the containers of the past. Are you ready? Full-time jobs is a container of the past.
And so, can I just stop you right there? I am talking to so many fractional COs, fractional CTOs, whatever. Yeah.
So full-time jobs is a container of the past, and jobs are a silly phase that work is going through. More and more people will eventually work without having a full-time job. They'll have a fractionalized job, which will give them insurance. They'll have optionality. Whether they like it or not, that's happening because of a combination of AI and a whole bunch of other things. So one is jobs are a container of the past. Second is organizations which believe that most of their employees are human are a container of the past. Okay.
I can see that.
So, for instance, McKinsey today has 40,000 humans and 15,000 agents. Okay.
Virtual agent.
Virtual. Today, I was talking to the head of a very, very large global company. And she said, one of the things I'm struggling with is how do I incorporate agents, okay, into my workforce? So that's the second. So the job is a container of the past. The current organizational designs, where people come to an office 5 days a week, go up and down, is a complete container of the past, which people are forcing people back into because their lack of imagination. They build these $3 billion buildings called JP Morgan Chase and force people in and say, you know what, we've got 7 bars. This is downtown Manhattan. There are 7 bars on that goddamn block. I don't have to come into your office to get a, right? It's just a total lack of imagination. The third container of the past, to a very important and interesting thing, is our own mindsets. So in effect, what we have to do is we have to constantly learn. So one of the things I tell people is I ask them to pull out their phone or their mobile device, and I say, hey, go to where it says software and just read the number. It'll tell you the number. So, if you look at most phones, it's 16, 17, or 18. Okay. So I said, your phone in the last 17 years has upgraded its mind 17 times. How many times have you upgraded your mental operating system? And I said, you keep thinking that the world is being unkind to you. Here's the deal: you have to adapt to the world. The world's not going to adapt to you. Right.
I love your raw honesty. It is so needed to be heard.
And I said, you can complain all you want, but nobody gives a damn. I might give a damn if I'm a friend or your family, and we can have tears and beers, but that's not going to solve anything. And so, how to upgrade your mindset, the job itself, the organizational structure, and then the other one is, it's both good or bad. Is thinking that careers are going to be less than 50 years. Okay, a lot of people basically say, we're going to have 30-year careers, 30-year, 35-year careers. I start working at 23, 24. I'll be retired by 58, 59, 60. So I said, okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to start working at 21, 22 if you can get a job, and you're likely to be working either because you have to or even because you want to, right? Till 75 plus. So you're going to have 50-year careers. If you're going to have 50-year careers, the way you think about your career is very different than if you had a 25 or 30-year career.
What you're talking about for me is being your authentic self and just being that and making space for yourself. You got to put on your big boy and your big girl panties to make that happen, to really walk into what you want instead of letting the world tell you what you should be about. Because you're right. There's a complete cleaning that has to happen inside of our minds.
Exactly. And what basically has, I think happened is that a lot of people don't want to do this. And so I spend a lot of time also telling them why they need to do it, but in a very funny way or a humorous way. And that one is, I tell them about how much I hate change. Okay. I said, hey, listen, I work for the same company for 37. I live in the same city for 44. I've known my wife since we were 12, which is 55 years ago. And so when somebody tells me change is good, I say, I'm very happy. I'm not changing. Thank you very much. I'm not going anywhere. I'm sitting in Chicago in the cold. I've been having this one job, which I still remain an advisor to. This woman comes and badgers me, and she has for 55 years. That goes on. I'm not doing anything different.
And yet you have changed a lot.
A lot. And the reason, so they said, like, what the hell are you talking about? So I said, look, change is neither good nor bad. I think change is actually bad. It's not necessarily good. In fact, it sucks. Okay. Because if you really want to change, it's like going to the gym. It's painful. You have to like get yourself into a new shape. It's painful. So I said, change sucks, but irrelevance is even worse.
Yep. Come on,
Right.
say it. That's
Right.
right.
And so
That's
my
good.
old stuff is, if you say you don't have time to change, I'll say, okay, but then you've got all the time to be irrelevant. Right. At which
I
stage
love this.
they sort of wake up. I said, I'm not sitting out here. I said, if you're going to be irrelevant, you're going to be irrelevant. There's nothing. I said, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, please don't be irrelevant. Because that's what I'm simply saying. If you don't change, you're irrelevant. If you're irrelevant, you're irrelevant. Then don't go running around saying the world doesn't love you, boo-hoo.
So listen, Rishad, I told you earlier that my company insists on a culture of honor. You know, when you have that in place, it actually leaks out to your clients. So it's just so natural. In your book, you have a chapter called How to Lead with Soul, and you identify 5 elements: honesty, of course, empathy, humility, inspiration, and vulnerability. So, not typical words associated with corporate leadership. So, especially in this hard charging, data obsessed business world, who, if they listen to this podcast, has to understand a change. But tell me why these qualities are so essential, and how can leaders who are kind of stuck, how can they cultivate them?
Because these are what makes somebody human. So here's my basic belief. People say, I want to run an organization that's fast moving. So I said, if you're going to move in an operation that's fast moving, people have to trust each other. Okay. Well, they'll trust each other if they see honesty and integrity. If they don't, they won't trust each other. So if you want to move fast in a world of speed, you better have trust. right? That's number one. Number two, all of us are dealing with this terrible thing called change. And then all of us also, depending on where we are in life, are dealing both with some amazing upsides and downsides. And those downsides might be family situations, financial situations, whatever it is,
Life. Yeah.
a life. And so what basically happens is if you think about the person as a human being and not just a widget in the machine, and acknowledge they have these challenges, just acknowledging that empathetically is very important. And it's very easy by simply asking them three questions, which is question number one, how are things? Number two is what's on your mind? And number three is how can I help you?
All true statements.
Right. And I said, you do that, and just asking those will help you. So that's empathy. The thing that I get a lot of pushback on, I might sell honesty, I might sell it empathy, etc. One of the pushbacks I get is on vulnerability, which is why are you going to show weakness? Right? I said there are three ways of looking at it. One is if you don't embrace your weaknesses and don't know that they have them, one way to embrace them is if you know them, you can work around them by having people in your team that offsets your weaknesses. Right? I said sometimes you can't get rid of your weaknesses, but you can plan around your weaknesses. So I said you can build great teams by doing that. That's number one. Second, vulnerability basically says I can make mistakes. And you tell people, I have made mistakes and I can make mistakes, which then allows your team to come to you and say, please don't make another mistake. I found something that you may be making another mistake, or we may be making another mistake. The third is every single human being has fears of failing, have failed, right? And if you say you are one of them, they believe you versus you refuse to. So when you're not vulnerable, it doesn't mean that you're not human. It means you're faking it. Okay. And again, I'm not saying like every moment come in and start crying and shuddering and things like that. That's not the way. But the idea really is, hey, I've made mistakes. I have weaknesses, right? Sometimes we're sort of challenged, and people actually trust you more. They like you more. They connect with you more.
Do you know that at one time, my husband and I mean, here I am in the financial services business. I help people make silk purses out of a sow's ear all day long. We lost everything in our life that had a dollar sign connected to it. I don't lead with that, but there are moments that I have to tell someone that so that they can have a string or a rope that they can hold on and get their way out. Yeah.
Yeah, and one way I've always basically said about empathy is, take a walk in somebody else's shoes.
Yes.
Okay, and when you do that, that becomes very, very important. And there's another thing which is a chapter in my first book, which I will speak about, and it's a funny way of actually making sure that you and your company, or even if your company is two people, okay, do well. And that is what I basically have the chapter that my bosses liked the most in my first book. And it's called The Turd on the Table.
A
Okay.
turd on the
The
table.
turd on the table. And what I discovered over years, this is the whole thing about being very digital, etc. I said, when companies got into trouble, whether it was Enron or more recently Boeing, etc., it was because everybody knew that there was a problem, but nobody called it out. Okay. So I said, often we sit around a table in an office and there's something brown and moist in the middle, and everybody pretends it's a brownie when it's a piece of shit. Okay. And we don't call it out because it might be the boss's piece of shit, or you're new to the company and you say, well, maybe this is what they consider to be a brownie. Or more likely, you're already cleaning up so much shit, you don't want to call up on more shit to clean up after. Right? But I said all these environments that say it's about trust and communication and collaboration, but they say, oh, but you can't say this and you can't do that and you can't do that. And that's how companies get into trouble.
I love that example. All right, we need to start wrapping up here. Look, this show is called Beyond the Numbers because we believe decisions happen best when money meets meaning and purpose. I mean, you literally wrote the book on this, arguing that we need to balance data with humanity. So, how do you personally think about that intersection in your own life and work? How do you stay grounded in meaning while operating in this crazy world that we live in?
So the metaphor I use is roots and wings, that you have to combine your roots and your wings. So your roots could be things that you hold firmly onto that you believe, and different people, it's some combination sometimes of faith, purpose, family, friends, particular hobbies, a town, whatever it is, rituals, those are certain things. And then the other one is wings, which is to go to where the future is, right? And that is, you have to bend towards where the light is. Sometimes the sun is shining in a different place. So, very much like a tree, you have to like bend towards that thing. And the interesting thing with the roots and wings is the wings, which are the leaves, feed the roots, and the roots feed the wings, and they go back and forth, right? And so the whole idea is, if you're too rooted, you become a stump of a tree. If you're all wings, you get blown away.
Yeah, that's
But if you
nice.
combine
Yeah.
them, then that's the way to think about it. It's the metaphor I think about.
There's so much that we did not cover today, but this has been such a great conversation. I hope you'll come back at some time.
Absolutely, Chris. I would love to do that.
That's great. So I want to ask for any leaders that are listening who are trying to figure out how to navigate this moment, the AI revolution, economic uncertainty, generational shifts in the workplace. Give them a piece of advice that would make an immediate impact.
The three pieces of advice, not one, that I
No,
would give you
okay.
that would make immediate impact is, starting tomorrow, take an hour a day to learn on anything that you think you want to learn about. It doesn't have to be about AI, it could be about opera, but get into the mindset of learning and take that from anything but family and sleep. And that's primarily because you and your company will not get better unless you get better. So you should spend an hour. The second is, once in a while, not all the time, build a case for the exact opposite of what you think is true.
I love that. I grew up in that environment. That's I wish our world would think that way.
Right. So once in a while, just say build the opposite case. If you can't build an opposite case, be very worried, because you might have actually become mind controlled, thinking that you still control your mind. And the third one, which I say more modern in this AI age, look at what you did the last month and how much of your time was spent allocating, delegating, monitoring, measuring, and checking in. If that was more than 50%, be worried, because you should actually be spending your time selling, building, guiding, mentoring, and making.
Well said. Woo. Well said. This has been absolutely fascinating and very deeply thought provoking, Rashad. So thanks for sharing your wisdom, your stories, your funny, funny stories, and your humanity. So, for any listener who wants to read your book, subscribe to your thought letter, or really just learn more about you and your work, where should they go?
So the best is for my thought letter, which is completely free, is at rishad.substack.com. So it's rishad.substack.com. And the other place to go is rethinkingwork.io, which is a free resource about how to think about the future of work in your careers. And in both of those places, you'll then find links to my book, which costs $15. But these two resources are completely free.
Wonderful, wonderful. And of course, we'll have all that in the show notes for you as well. And so, to my listeners today, thank you for joining us today on Beyond the Numbers. If you've enjoyed this conversation, and I trust you have, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear Rashad's message about staying human in the age of data. And until next time, remember, the best decisions happen where money meets meaning and purpose. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much, Rashad. I really appreciated your time today.
Thank you, Chris.
Beyond the Numbers podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.